All right, so we are here today with the Senior Vice President of Strategic Business Innovation and Technology. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Awesome. With the National Association of REALTORS, Mr. Mark Birschbach. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. I'm really excited to have you as our very, very first guest on the Beyond the Box podcast. We wanted to put this podcast together for a couple of reasons. Up here in Canada, there just isn't a voice, sort of a commentating voice on really the real estate industry, but especially real estate technology and capital, kind of at that intersection. And I couldn't think of anybody better to bring on as our first guest than you, because you've really been championing exactly that down in the US on behalf of the NAR and its venture arm, Second Century Ventures, which I want to hear a little bit more about in a second. So thank you for joining us. And I'd love to start right there. I mean, we're recording this during this weird sort of pandemic time. So of course we're both at home, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we get there, I'd love to hear just a little bit about your origin story, where you sort of came from in the industry and how you landed in the spot you are now.
Sure. It's a good place to start. So I actually started my career on Wall Street. I was an investment banker doing mergers and acquisitions in New York City. I joined Wall Street in the late 90s, which was really the first tech boom when we were seeing NASDAQ 5000. And so I really gravitated towards working on technology transactions, which is when, I really started to get passionate about innovation, technology, and things like that. But I was really looking at it from an advisory perspective or a financial perspective, as well as really a strategic perspective, what companies made sense to combine together, create synergies, et cetera. So I did that for almost a decade. And then I had moved to Chicago in the meantime. And when the financial crisis hit, our firm was really consolidating offices back into the New York area, and I wanted to stay in Chicago. So I actually left banking and found myself in the startup world. So I actually joined a technology startup, really early stage. We hadn't really raised much capital. But our main product was a web marketing platform that we were selling to realtors. So I got my, indoctrination into really real estate, as well as what it was like to be a startup tech entrepreneur. And what I realized about real estate the really hard way was it's incredibly complicated. And we spent a lot of time, a lot of capital trying to figure out who is our customer and how should we be targeting them, and what was the difference between, this association world or brokerage world, and how did the MLS system all play into that. And as a tech entrepreneur, it's incredibly challenging to figure all that out and to navigate through that, which that combined with it really being, this was 2009, 2010, one of the worst real estate markets in history, given what had happened. It was really challenging for us to get that business to work, but it really opened the door, which was an opportunity for me to join the NAR in 2013 and help launch our REAch program. So I had a really good financial M&A background. I had, I'll say, dabbled in the startup world as a startup entrepreneur myself, and happened to be working in the real estate industry from a tech entrepreneur perspective. And that experience made me the perfect fit to come work for the NAR, to use those resources to help companies be successful in this place. So I joined NAR in 2013 when we founded and launched the first REAch class, the first REAch program.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about REAch its genesis, what the purpose was. And I know that there's a bit of a step before REACH happened. So Second Century was stood up, which would have been before your time with NAR. But I'd love for you to kind of weave those pieces together as well.
Yeah, for a very large trade association to have a venture capital arm is pretty interesting, pretty amazing, actually. And the story of Second Century Ventures even goes a little bit farther back, when a guy by the name of Scott Fisher came to NAR in the early 2000s with an idea for a lockbox company, which has now been very successful. It's a company we wholly own called CentriLock. But it was his idea to approach the NAR and say, I need capital to start this business. Your members are getting price gouged by a competitor in the industry who really has sort of a monopoly in the industry. And the NAR's response back to him was, well, we'll promote your product. This is how much we charge. It was a marketing and advertising relationship. And he sort of flipped it on its head and said, well, no, I'm looking for you to give me money to invest in my company. And, thankfully, Bob Goldberg and the senior management and leadership at the time, this is a really interesting concept to get behind and start backing companies that can help support our members. So that was really the first, call it, transaction that the NAR did. And what they realized through that process was, with a lot of committees and a lot of red tape, and to get something like that through that entire system was really challenging and took a really long time. And if you want to be in the venture capital business, you need to be able to move quickly. So that was the idea behind creating Second Century Ventures as a wholly owned subsidiary with a separate board that could move really quickly when opportunities came to the table. So as part of NAR's Second Century initiatives in 2008 to launch the entire association into its second century of existence, they created Second Century Ventures, which is really our venture capital arm, where we take investment dollars or capital and invest that into technology companies that can help our members. So that was launched in 2008, made its first investment in 2009 into a company called DocuSign, which not many people had heard of at the time. Now many people are using it and have heard of it. So that has been a huge success story for the fund. But as it evolved over time, we realized that we were missing out on some earlier stage companies that we could help bring into the marketplace that could really help our members. So when Second Century Ventures was founded, the board had a pretty strict investment criteria. We couldn't invest in any company that didn't have at least $2 million in revenue or a significant customer base. It was a way that they wanted to manage risk associated with where they were investing their dollars. So what we realized is we're missing out on a lot of opportunities. So there were earlier stage companies coming to the table, and we had no vehicle to really partner with those companies. So we got the idea to start REACH, which is more of a programmatic experience for typically an earlier stage company, but the way it's evolved over the last almost decade now is we actually get later stage companies or companies with a lot of traction in other markets who really want that programmatic experience to help launch themselves into real estate. So it's really evolved over time with that very early CentriLock investment that ultimately paved the way for Second Century Ventures to exist, and now REACH to exist, which we just launched our 8th core REACH class. We've expanded that program significantly, and it's bringing a lot of value to the table for our members.
I love that you weave the story out that way. I just learned why it's now called Second Century Ventures. So that's a very cool little tidbit of information to have. I know I've had a lot of people say, like, why Second Century Ventures? So now we know. Launching realtors into their second century. So that's really awesome.
That's right.
So the REACH program is launching its 8th cohort in the US. So obviously it has been an extremely successful program. Can you give us just a few metrics around kind of historically what that portfolio looks like, how it's performed, and how NAR Second Century maybe measures the relative success of the program and why it continues to invest and expand?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we really look at two major criteria when we're looking at partnering with any company. First and foremost is what is the value that it can bring to our members. So what product, what service, what pain point is it trying to solve? What does the marketplace look like? How will it help our members be more successful? That is first and foremost the number one criterion. Secondly, and I think of them really more as 1A and 1B because they're both very important, is we track and measure financial success or ROI on that investment. So it could be the greatest product in the world, but if it's not going to get traction and the company isn't going to do well financially, then that's not something that we would put our equity or dollars behind. So we really look at those two criteria. In 2013, we launched our first class with 7 companies. We've typically had anywhere between 7 and 9 companies in the REACH program each year. And then we'll do follow-on investing in a handful of each of those classes, in a handful of companies from each of those classes, depending on how successful they are.
Awesome. So how many companies, what is the portfolio size of NAR? So 7 to 9 must be somewhere around 70, 80 companies now that have gone through the REACH program.
So last year, I guess almost 2 years ago now, we actually acquired a local accelerator, which we modified and turned that into our commercial program, which we just launched our second cohort this year, that are our commercial real estate technology solutions. So if you include that portfolio, which we acquired, which was 20 some companies, the total SCV and REACH portfolio is over 100 companies.
Amazing. So really expansive traction across, sort of the up and coming tech that is supporting the real estate sector.
That's right.
So the other piece that I was hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about is sort of the vision for moving forward. So the REACH commercial program, I know, was an initial opportunity to expand the original concept, but there's also been more move to expand, not just REACH. So I'd love you to talk to that point, and sort of in conjunction with that, how that fits into, and I want to weave back to your particular role in terms of business strategy, strategic business, innovation, and technology, and maybe how the REACH program is helping to check some of those boxes from an NAR perspective.
There's a lot.
A lot in that? Do you want me to back up?
Yes.
Do you want me to parse it out?
Not at all. I can handle it. So let me talk about REACH first of all. So, we've expanded REACH quite a bit, significantly. And we really looked at 3 different strategies, which are in various stages of being executed. So there's a lot of innovation happening around real estate and around the real estate transaction, and places where we can help our members be more successful if we help innovate those areas. So the first strategy of which the commercial expansion really fit into was what we call our vertical strategy. So what are real estate adjacent industries or areas which impact real estate transactions where we can invest in, help innovate, and make things easier and more productive for our consumers as well as our members. So think things like mortgage technology and insurance technology and settlement services technology, and commercial real estate technology, which is actually quite a bit different from residential. So we include commercial really as another vertical, even though it is more real estate transaction focused. So we've had companies who maybe were more focused on addressing those specific verticals that have tried to, with varying degrees of success, tried to come through the REAch Core program. And we realize that we have an opportunity to, as we expand and grow, to tailor something better for them so that they're getting a lot of value out of it, as well as our members are getting a lot of value out of it. So our first vertical is really the commercial vertical, which we're focused on trying to make successful, but we are looking at other verticals for future expansion. The second major growth area in which we've gotten a lot of traction in is our global expansion. So this really came about because we had international companies who were looking to participate in REAch to open up their US market. So the very first company we had was a German-based company, which was a #1 player in Europe, and they were looking to expand into the US. They opened their first office and realized, wow, this is a lot different than Europe. How do we figure out how to penetrate the United States? And I was introduced to them, and we had this great opportunity to bring our first international company into the US using REAch. Well, that sort of gave us the idea that innovation is happening everywhere, not just in the United States. And how can we go find international companies that we could bring into the US that could help our US-based members? And so what we started doing last year was we really launched our REAch Global effort with our first cohort in Australia. We had 4 Australian-based companies come into the US via REAch in 2017, 18, and 19. So there's a lot of similarities to the United States real estate market in Australia. And so it seemed like a natural place to start. So we've since announced that we're going to do REAch Canada this year. We'll do REAch UK this year, and then obviously REAch US, with the idea that let's go find innovation that's happening everywhere and get involved in that through these bilateral partnership agreements we have with, let's call them sister organizations in real estate in those countries. We have a natural connection there. And then we have significant connections in the international technology and venture capital communities where we can go find the best and brightest companies, run them through these, call them local programs to those countries. And then when they're ready to come into the US, they've gotten some traction in their own space, in their own location, and we can help them do really well in the US. And I think further down the road, I now have this portfolio of, let's call it 100 companies that as they saturate the US-based real estate market, maybe get into some of those additional verticals by expanding their products and solutions across some of our vertical programs, are looking to grow their businesses beyond the US and get into some of these countries where we'll already have a systematic way to launch them into those countries like we did for them in the US. So that was really the vision around international expansion. Is innovation is happening everywhere, and let's bring some of that to the table for our members.
That's awesome. So you mentioned 3 strategies: vertical specific, global expansion. Is there a third, or was that woven into the last?
There is a third, which we are still working on and have not disclosed yet, but there is a third strategy we're looking at.
Cool. So I hear a second podcast coming up in the near future.
Yes.
Cool. That's very awesome. I love that. I love, one of the things that I've had the opportunity to see is, sort of this global interest in the REACH program, which speaks really highly to not just the quality and caliber of the program, but the reach of the program around the world, pardon the pun, but already, and how successful some of those companies have been because of their participation in the REACH program. So I love the wider vision to, sort of the whole technology without borders approach, so that there's an opportunity to expand that value across around the world. So I love that. I love that. So
that fits in really well with the overall strategy of the Strategic Business Innovation and Technology Group, of which Second Century Ventures are a key piece of, but they really fit in kind of in the middle of what I call the value chain. So if you think, just in their purest form, REACH is an early stage company, and we partner with them when they're early stage. They grow, and we maybe invest in them from Second Century Ventures as they grow and they start to fit into that investment criteria. While we've been incredibly successful in that band of companies, there was work to do around, well, how about if you went up the value chain to what we call our big tech initiatives, which is, what is our conversation and relationship with some of these really large tech companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon, Microsoft, and you can go down the list, and how does the NAR work with those companies to make sure that if they want to do something in real estate, that they do it in a way that is beneficial to our members as opposed to detrimental. So we've really started to open up a lot of dialogue with those companies, and we have a number of different avenues within how we go about creating relationships with them, whether that's a straight up, marketing relationship. I also oversee the REALTOR Benefits Program, which is the program where we partner with, as large as Fortune 100 companies who are looking to bring a valuable product or service to our members at a discount for our members so they can take advantage of it. So there's marketing and advertising relationships that we can have. There's corporate development, or let's look at this 100 company portfolio of yours and figure out what we're missing and how it might fit in with what we're doing. And maybe it gives us a toehold into real estate. And that's interesting conversation we're able to have at the corporate development level. And then I'll go all the way down the value chain to the really early stage, raw, pure technology. So think of things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and VR and AR and
blockchain.
I try not to list that one because I a little bit ahead of its time as far as having practical applications. That makes sense, but we are certainly incredibly involved in blockchain and how it can and will potentially affect real estate. But yes, perfect example. So I have a team of emerging technologists who their sole focus is identifying, researching those kinds of technologies, and then going out and having those conversations with the people who are funding development of that. And a lot of that funding of development is happening, yes, in the startup world, which we have a pulse on it from a REACH and SCV perspective, but there's a lot of funding at, again, big corporations or government institutions or academic institutions that are doing a lot of research and development around different technologies. And our goal is to be on the forefront of that, be involved where those conversations are happening, and then thinking, many steps ahead of how this can and ultimately will affect real estate consumers, our members, and be early in those conversations. And that a lot of those conversations tend to really feed what we're doing into REAch. So you think about the evolution of a company starts with an idea, maybe an underlying technology that becomes a really early stage product that is going to evolve over time. And, maybe it gets some traction into real estate. It makes sense for that company to go through REAch. We invest in it out of SCV, and then the company is on its way. So where I want to be is in really all levels of the conversation, from super early stage raw technology all the way up to huge multi-billion, even trillion-dollar big tech company. And this new group gives us the ability to do that.
I think it's amazing, Mark, the way you've sort of woven out that picture of the value chain. It's, I think it's really important to note that NAR, as one of the very, very largest trade associations, is really positioning itself strategically and purposefully, right? But also in a very meaningful way in every aspect of what I would call almost that virtuous circle that you're creating, right? So, there's the chain concept where you invest kind of middle stage and hope that you can extrapolate to the end piece of the value chain. But really what you're doing is then feeding that system. You're really creating the entire ecosystem. And I think to a certain degree, shaping that entire ecosystem for the future of the real estate practitioner for certain, but by virtue of making certain that you are impacting all aspects of that real estate ecosystem, not just the transaction on the ground, not just, within finance and mortgage. And so, I think it really shifts the dialogue to, the real estate industry driving more of what the sector looks like, rather than sitting back and passively accepting whatever the sector becomes and then reacting to it. So I think that is an amazing sort of path forward.
That's very much the goal, is to have a proactive approach to innovation and how things will change over time. And ultimately, where our member sits in the relationship with the consumer and to the transaction, and making sure that as their role has to evolve over time based on how consumer preferences are evolving over time, that they are positioned to be successful. And that's why we're here and why we do what we do.
Love it. So I want to be conscious of your time. Because I just want to note that we're actually recording this right in the middle of the unprecedented virtual mid-year meetings for NAR. And I know that you have a lot of things that you need to do. So I just have two more questions. One more question, and then let's leave it at that question. So we are recording this during legislative week, or mid-year legislative meetings week for NAR. But also during the COVID pandemic. So we can't not address that in the context of this conversation. And I'd love to hear from you a little bit about how you, or more specifically NAR, is approaching this period of time in the context of that innovation sort of agenda, and how you think that might shift the thinking, where you think the shifts might happen. Does it impact what Second Century is investing in? Really wide open field here for you to address that. It's I think it's anybody's guess, but I'd love to know what the current thinking is.
Yeah, I mean, this has obviously been a pretty significant curveball to really any industry, real estate, for sure. I think what it's really highlighted, really in any industry, is how can you be productive and get things done when you're not able to meet face to face, or you can't be in the same room, or if you are in the same room, you have to be a safe distance apart. And we've seen, fortunately, we've been working really hard to follow consumer preferences for digital transactions and eliminating a lot of the potential face-to-face interaction just from a convenience perspective. Well, that idea has been, supercharged when people can't meet face-to-face. So the companies that we've invested in, over the last 5 to 6 years that do anything to try to mimic a face-to-face relationship or experience digitally or virtually are getting significant traction. All the digital transaction tools like e-signature and remote notarization and things like that are getting significant traction because people can't physically get together. So luckily we were, on the forefront with a lot of those technologies. We already had them in our portfolio. Those companies were getting a lot of traction already just due to consumer preference of convenience and, not being able to be in a place. And we've seen through this, I think some of the slower to adopt those technologies or prefer those technologies now can't get enough of them because they can't do business without them. So, I think it remains to be seen as we come out of this, what is the new normal. I think, obviously these companies were very well positioned to, for lack of a better word, take advantage of a situation like this. But I think this will impact how business gets done in the future. And the more people get comfortable with the tools that, the technology tools that they can use that were just a convenience, from a convenience perspective, now they're really be looked at, as a safety perspective, we're well positioned. So NAR is doing a lot to help our members navigate through this. There's business challenges, there's safety challenges, there's regulatory and legislative challenges. And we have been working around the clock to help address all of those things for our members.
Awesome. Very cool. And I've been watching it and I've been seeing it through all of the, the news channels, just how much NAR is doing to, and it's one piece we haven't even touched on, but the intersection of advocacy and technology and how well situated NAR is to facilitate some of those changes that have actually prevented tech from evolving just because of the regulatory barriers. So again, another podcast, because I am watching the clock and you do have to go. So Mark, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you doing this. I think, how you and the team at NAR have set up the SCV and REAch initiative are going to, speak volumes in the future. I am actually really excited about what this period of time offers for those initiatives, but they will only be successful because of the foundation that was set up. So kudos to you and to the team for doing that. And best of luck with the rest of the legislative meetings. And hopefully we see each other face to face and in person before this time next year.
Hopefully, I agree. Thank you very much for having me.